I'm Lucia Athens. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer for the City of Austin. I want to thank Aaron Wood for helping to organize this session, and also Leah Haney for helping pull all this together. We're very delighted to have Stephen with us. He's actually in town for a session, multiple-day session he's having out at the Center for Maximum Potential Building Systems, so we were able to get a little bit of his time to share with us today. Stephen and I think maybe are 1 degree of separation. Like, we have been kind of moving in parallel circles for years and years, and it's really strange that we finally just met face to face. So that feels really good. He's going to be talking to us today about green roofs, green walls, green infrastructure. He has really significant expertise on this topic from work he's done all over the country. He's going to be sharing some case studies with us today. He's the founder and president of Green Roofs for Healthy Cities. It's an industry association for green roofs and green walls in North America. He's also the co-founder of the Green Infrastructure Foundation. And we were talking just before this about some of the work that the foundation is doing and some ideas we have about that we want to explore about how we might work together kind of moving forward after today. He's the co-founder of the World Green Infrastructure Network, which is having its 7th World Congress meeting in Bogota, Colombia. So really cool stuff, and we're really happy to have you. Thank you all for coming. And before we get started, we were going to go around and have people say who they are, but the group got so big now, I'm not really sure that we want to take up the time doing that. So and let's just do it in a kind of a more of an umbrella fashion. How many folks are here from the design sector that are designers? Cool. How many people in the public sector? How about like development community, developers? All right. We need you. Let's see, what did I miss? What else? We're general citizens interested in all this stuff. Yeah. Okay. All right, did we get everybody? Who did not raise their hand? Yes. I'm a landscaper. Oh, a landscape architect. I kind of was using like the design thing more generally. Over here?
University students.
University students, thank you. All right, cool. Good cross-section. All right, so I'm going to hand it over to you, Stephen. We have an hour. We're going to try to have a little bit of time for questions at the end, but as I said, we'll kind of continue that at social hour if we don't get to all your questions. Thank you.
Let's give it up for Lucia. 1 degree of separation. Thanks a lot. It's a pleasure to be back in the weirdest city in America. Always like coming down here. It's about my 7th or 8th time coming down. And it's really a pleasure to also share with you a couple of the award-winning projects from last year, which we presented in New York City at our conference, and also a new initiative that we're just getting underway through the Green Infrastructure Foundation that I think may have some applicability here. So I'll try to move through the slides pretty quickly and leave some time for questions at the end. And thank you all. It's such a beautiful day. I came down from the Great White North to be here, so it's actually very torturous for me to be right here right now with you when I'd rather be out in the sunshine, but I do love you all, and I love what you do with green infrastructure. So here we go. If I had $1 billion, let's go, Kelly, if you would. So we have a Green Infrastructure Foundation. Our mandate really is to spread the gospel of green infrastructure all throughout Canada and the United States. I want to talk about some of the award-winning projects I've got some crib notes on that, get into the Green Infrastructure project, in particular why I think it might have some applicability here in Austin, and then give you some examples of where we've done this work in other cities, and then hopefully have some questions and answers. Next slide, please. So yeah, we're a tax-exempt organization. We've been around since 2007. We started, actually 2007, nobody even knew what green infrastructure was. We started doing training. Actually, we had some training here about green infrastructure in different cities throughout North America. We're really about education, evaluation, making the case that we need to invest more in living green infrastructure. Next slide. So we've had all these workshops. We have a conference called Gray to Green. Come on up to Toronto, Canada. Your dollar, it's kicking butt right now. You're at about $1.40 Canadian, which means, think about that, folks, 40% off everything. It's a fantastic time. And let me let you in on another little secret. Toronto is the music capital of Canada. I mean, we got music happening in a very serious way in that town. So June 1st to 4th, come on, you're all writing it down. Yeah, we're going to road trip up there. It'll be great. So we're going to have that at Gray to Green. So that's all about green infrastructure and climate change. That's what that conference is about, and the latest science, technology, and the latest design work. And then we have this new Green Infrastructure Charrette program, and we are developing standards for green infrastructure, performance standards, through something called the Living Architecture Performance Tool, which I'm not going to get into today. So this awards program we have, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Eleanor McKinney, can you put your hand up, Eleanor? Is the only one who's won this award in Austin, from Austin. Am I right about that? I think you may be the only one. Stand up, Eleanor. No, come seriously, stand up. She won it for, I don't know, 6, 7 years ago. I think you won for City Hall. Is that right? Intensive green roof. I got you blushing. So we have these categories, and we actually evaluate these projects when they come in for awards, and we have a multidisciplinary team that does that, and we look at the functionality. What's it doing? What kind of performance are we getting from it ecologically? What are the economic benefits that we can derive from the project? Of course, aesthetics has to be part of the evaluation, and what's the overall context for the project. So I'm going to share a couple of quick projects with you that I think you might find interesting. Next slide. This is our extensive lightweight green roof systems. Lightweight, low growing media, less than 6 inches, very limited plant palette, low loading capacity requirement for the building. So we're not building trees and shrubs here. These are lightweight systems, extensive industrial, commercial. And that's actually the roof of the building. You're looking at that picture right there. And this was done by Barry Architecture in a place called Red Deer, Alberta. Next slide, please. So this is an old warehouse, and they wanted to convert it to a sort of a state-of-the-art facility. It's a LEED Gold building. Next slide, please. And so what their goal was here was to create a biodiverse habitat for wildlife with an emphasis on indigenous pollinators by providing food with a range of indigenous plant species, as well as flowering water and perching and nesting sites for birds. You guys have all heard about the problems we're having with pollinators dying off, right? All around the world. That's a really serious problem, much more serious than people realize, because a lot of the foods that we eat require pollinators. Without pollinators, we don't have a lot of those lovely foods that we like to eat. So to actually introduce habitat for pollinators in an urban area is a really cool application of green roof technology. So that really got the judges going, and they won an award of excellence for this project. Next slide, please. So this is sort of the flip side of an extensive green roof. This is an intensive green roof, right? So deep growing media, trees and shrubs, a lot more weight on the structure, structural loading capacity, almost always accessible. We very rarely do people put in these roof gardens or intensive green roofs without making them accessible to the building occupants or the general public. And this is the Adventura Optima Plaza in Adventura, Florida, almost the opposite side of the continent from Red Deer, Alberta. Now we're going all the way down to the south into Florida. Next slide, please. Now this project, really what they wanted to do was create accessible green space, primarily for the building occupants, but they also wanted to reduce the urban heat island effect. And both these levels, actually, this level down here and this level up here, are both intensive green roof assemblies. Next slide, please. So it provides stormwater management benefits, but it also invites the people that work in the offices to run on a track, to go out and have access to the green roof. And one of the things that we're finding in the literature right now and the research that's being done is that some of the best benefits of green roofs aren't how much stormwater they hold or how much energy they save. But the best benefits for a commercial application like this are the fact they can improve the productivity of the employees that work inside, right? Because when you look outside at a green roof or you have access to a green roof, we find lower levels of stress in employees, right? Greater levels of efficiency, less absenteeism, and there's a growing body of literature that is demonstrating that those have very, very significant bottom line benefits for commercial and institutional building owners, whether it's hospitals and patients, more rapid patient recovery time, less stress on staff, or it's in multi-unit housing. In multi-unit housing buildings, we're finding higher property values, less vandalism in affordable housing units. So this human element of the green infrastructure technology is coming to the fore, health and well-being and all the associated economic benefits that stem from that. That's a big area that's emerging right now. Next slide, please. So as you can see, we can put palm trees up on an extensive green roof. There's a bell wave pattern that's incorporated here. The perspective on the garden is constantly changing. They've worked very hard to create a nice area also that's accessible and usable at night. They've used native plants in this particular design to attract wildlife. They've used reclaimed green heartwood wood for all the crosswalks, which bisect the gardens. Just a fantastic project, very much developer-driven, very much about return on investment, very high quality, high value commercial office space. Next slide, please. So this is an intensive residential project. We're coming back sort of closer to the middle of the continent here with a window here in New York City, the Tribeca Loft. This project was won by Tribeca in New York, and it's a really cool project because of the many design attributes they crammed into a fairly small space. Of course, in New York, where you spend like $10 zillion on a 200 square foot apartment in Manhattan, $10 zillion. Can someone write that down? 200 square feet. Guys, I know it's Friday afternoon, but come on, you know. It's not that bad in Manhattan, okay? It's not that bad. But maybe $1 million for 500 square feet. That's what you're going to pay for an apartment in Manhattan. So the space on the roof is super valuable, right? Next slide, please. And, you know, get creative. What can you do with it? They create this beautiful oasis right in the downtown. This is a 19th century loft building, and they've integrated a whole bunch of different types of roof gardens on this. Of course, they have the all-important hot tub facility, too, built in here. It's a real cutting-edge design. They have topographical decking. They've done all these really cool things with the decking system. You can see all the contours built in. They've tried to create a juxtaposition between the various elements. They've created zones for refuge as well as recreation. So there's a lot of different functionalities. They've got a sort of a wildlife area over here for pollinators and wildflowers. Next slide, please. It looks like part of the High Line. It almost does look like part of the High Line. So it's just been a fantastic project. There's views. I mean, I think this is really cool, right? You could have your little tub inside while it's raining and have a look out over your amazing roof deck. They've got trees and shrubs. Just a really fantastic project. Probably millions of dollars this particular condominium is worth. Next slide, please. So I'm going to shift gears here. I'm going to show you one of the examples of one of the green wall projects that won. This is called Breathe. It's in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and it won the category for the living wall. It was actually designed by the Dave McKenzie, who's the owner of LiveWall. This particular project, next slide please, features over 3,500 plants. It's over 20 feet tall at its peak, and it stretches about 150 feet long. And if you travel through Asia, as I have been fortunate to do, you'll see a lot of green wall technology all throughout Asia, particularly in places like Japan. And in this particular case, what this green wall is doing is buffering a bunch of waste dumpsters that lie behind the building. So a lot of green walls get implemented to hide something ugly around a building, so sort of almost like cladding, self-standing cladding. And there was a public, it's in a public area where there was a lot of educational benefits that came from it, trying to restore the balance between the urban settings by reintroducing the vegetation in areas where it's very difficult to do so. Now here in Austin, I'm pretty sure, although a couple times I've been here and I've been very disappointed, Austin, I have to tell you, very disappointed. Freezing rain, I mean, give me a break, okay? Why is it freezing rain down here? In fact, I woke up this morning and I saw something ugly, very ugly in the city. Frost. I saw frost on the grass. Now, so freeze-thaw cycles, tell me, is that a big deal down here? Because if you've got freeze-thaw cycles, it's tough to keep something like this alive over the winter months because of desiccation, lack of moisture, right? The freeze-thaw cycle draws it out. So we don't get a lot of this type of stuff in Canada or New York. We don't get a lot of living wall systems. We get green facades where the vines grow up, but we don't get living wall systems until we get to places where there's less freeze-thaw cycles because it's difficult to keep the plants alive. But this was a temporary facility in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and they took it apart at the end. Next slide, please. and they transformed it into something else, which is really cool because these are all panels. This is all panel-based system, so they disassembled it, and then they reestablished it in another area, and they were it was replanted with 700 square feet of herbs, grasses, and vegetables. And they started growing vegetables with all these panels, and the vegetables were used in the local restaurants. So they turned it into a green wall vegetable garden afterwards because they were able to reuse all the material. So it went from this, actually it went from this to this to this. And the judges loved this, so they gave it an award. Next slide, please. And that was one of the applications as well because of the large area of these vines and so forth in this walkway, transforming ugly concrete, non-biophilic areas to beautiful ones. Next slide, please. So that's a little taste of just some of the award-winning projects. I hope to see some of you who are the design community putting your projects forward next year. Is that going to be a possibility this year? Maybe anybody think they might have an award-winning project? No, just one person. Ooh, maybe. Oh, I'm so shy. You're never going to win an award if you're going to be like that, right? So let me talk about this. I've spent most of my adult life, working life, trying to figure out how to bring greenery onto buildings, right? I've been at this for about 18 years now. Not as a designer or a developer, but as an instigator, someone that's trying to develop the market. And so the Green Infrastructure Shred is our new product that we've developed, which is aiming to try to address a number of issues that we see that are challenging to people that want to use green infrastructure, policymakers that want to implement it in their Code Next policies, for example, for Austin, but elsewhere, people looking to fund green infrastructure, struggling to make the business case, designers trying to make the case with their clients that this is a good investment. There's a lot of challenges like that out there. Next slide, please. So I'm sitting around in a cafe 2 years ago talking to a friend of mine, a colleague of mine that's very keen on urban agriculture. Lauren Baker was her name. And we're sitting around talking, and we get this idea that part of the problem here for people working with green infrastructure is we're not thinking about it the right way. The way we need to be thinking about green infrastructure is along the lines of the way people think about gray infrastructure, right? Roads, bridges, sewers, wastewater treatment plants, right? We spend billions and billions of dollars on this stuff every year, right? Because we need it, and it's important to us. But we don't think about green infrastructure in those terms. So this is really, in part, an exercise in changing the way we think about things, right? Because the way we think about things determines how much we value them. And how much we value them, in fact, is what determines what we do about them, whether or not we invest our time and energy in them or not, right? So take something like the Super Bowl, for example. The Super Bowl is coming up on Sunday. How many people in the room are planning to watch the Super Bowl? Show of hands. How many people in the room are planning not to watch the Super Bowl? It's about 50-50. Pretty interesting, pretty interesting. That might be different, I think, if I went down to Houston, those odds. But the Super Bowl, right, is, if you think about it, it's a sporting event. It's an artificially created recreational entertainment thing, right, that people invest a lot of time and energy and value in, right? And that's how they're able to generate billions of dollars of ad revenue, create this awesome event, entertain millions of people, right, because the value is there. So the part of the issue then for us working in green infrastructure is we're not putting forward the value enough. We know that trees are beautiful, and we know that flowering beds are lovely, but are we putting our best foot forward in terms of value? How do we do that? We think about green infrastructure, start thinking about it in terms of gray infrastructure terms. Now, what does that mean? Well, one way of thinking about gray infrastructure is in terms of scale. We spend billions of dollars on gray infrastructure. So we went and said, what does $1 billion get you? And I had a whole bunch of slides, and I just put one in here, but essentially $1 billion of public money is going to get you somewhere between 4 to 155 miles of highway. It depends on how many bridges you have to get built, how much rock you have to blast through. That's why there's so much of a difference, right? So 4 would be at the highest end. 155 is a heck of a bargain for highway, right? We don't think twice about spending $1 billion on building highways and roadworks, right? Next slide, please. $1 billion applied to New York City, It's going to get you more than 25 million square feet of green roofs in New York City. What about the next slide, please? What if you all had $1 billion to spend on green infrastructure in Austin, Texas? Now, you just spent $175 million since 1998 setting aside green space in Austin, Texas, which is a brilliant move. And that will pay off big time in the future. But what if you had $1 billion to spend, let's say in the next 10 years, on green infrastructure? Let's think gray infrastructure terms. Is that hurting anybody's brain yet? Does anybody want to make for the doors? Right? Imagine we had $1 billion, right? In a way that some people go, what? That's ridiculous. This guy, yeah, $1 billion, that's nuts. Next slide, please. Well, in Philadelphia, they've already lined up to spend $2.4 billion on green infrastructure over the next 20 years. Because in Philadelphia, they have a real problem with combined sewer overflow. And that's a big issue for them because it's polluting their waterways. And so they're looking at neighborhoods and they're saying, wow, here's what our neighborhood looks like now. What if we get serious about investing significantly in green infrastructure? Can we make it look like this? How would we transform this neighborhood? What could be done? Next slide, please. So I'm sitting there with my friend in the cafe, and we start talking about this, and we start asking ourselves some questions like, what would it look like? How much jobs? You know, when you listen to the gray infrastructure guys, they say, yeah, we're going to build that roadway, and we're going to generate so much employment. They're always bringing up employment numbers, right, when we do gray infrastructure, because often we invest in gray infrastructure to create jobs, especially when the economy is tanking. What would the cost be? How do we measure the benefits? Can we measure the benefits of that type of green infrastructure investment? Would there be a return on investment? What would the public return be? What would the private return be? Right? We, the people working in green infrastructure, we don't have the answers to these questions. Do we? Can anybody answer this question right now? If we had $1 billion to spend in Austin? Just as an exercise, a thought exercise? Any engineers here that want to take a stab at it? Anybody want to put an award-winning project forward next year? No, they're tough questions to ask, right? But these are the kind of questions routinely that people working in gray infrastructure are faced with and answer all the time. The gray infrastructure guys, they know the answers to these questions. But the green infrastructure people, they don't. Next slide, please. So after this breakfast and having this intense discussion stuff, we said, well, we've got to figure out some way of dealing with this, changing the situation. So we applied and we got some funding, and we developed the green infrastructure charrette and the cost-benefit methodology. And we did so in partnership with a number of different groups. And then we went out to 6 different cities, including New York City most recently, and we went through this exercise with them. And we got feedback about how it works and what doesn't work, right? So we could work out the best approach. And I wanted to take a little bit of time describing this to you because now we're poised for global domination. No, I mean the rollout of the program. That's what we're working on right now. And here's where you can actually find the report. If you're really fast, you can write that down. You can write that down, or you can just go to greenroofs.org resources. We're really excited by it because we've had really fantastic feedback from the communities that we've worked in and we work with to try to figure out some answers to these questions. Next slide, please. So there's 2 pieces to this puzzle. One piece is understanding the costs and benefits. So we created a matrix of values so we could try to understand the costs and benefits of different types of green infrastructure. Very easy to say, much more difficult to do. And then, of course, we've all been involved. Anybody who's a designer has been involved in design charrette, so you'll know what that process is. But we wanted to marry these 2 together with a method so that what we designed at an aggregate scale, at a big picture scale, in 2 to 3 areas in the community, which are picked by the community, we could marry with the cost-benefit matrix. Next slide, please. So the matrix is an analytical tool. It's based on an extensive literature review that we did over a period of a year. We also subjected the matrix to a peer review process. And we've worked with the matrix in 6 different communities. So we can generate a 1, a 5, a 25, and a 50-year simple payback analysis for an aggregate green infrastructure plan through the cost-benefit matrix. Next slide, please. So the thing that to focus on here, to be clear about, is it's an aggregate cost-benefit matrix. We're looking at multiple forms of green infrastructure applied to multiple areas. And in terms of doing that, we have to simplify things. So it's not the same thing as a cost-benefit study you would do on a particular project, which would be more exacting and detailed. This is an aggregate scale cost-benefit analysis. So we've simplified the costs and benefits associated with 15 generic types of green infrastructure. Living green infrastructure system, there's 15 types that we look at. There's obviously an infinite number of types of green infrastructure that you can design in terms of the details and so forth, right? But we had to standardize these to 15 different types in order to calculate what the benefits would be. And we've been able to look through the literature. Despite the fact there's a lot of benefits of green infrastructure, there's only 11 benefits they were actually able to monetize, provide a monetary value for. There's only 11 benefits of the many, many benefits. Am I being translated into some other language here or something? And then the two costs, of course, are capital costs and maintenance costs, right? That's what we're doing. And we've boiled it all down into dollars per square foot. Well, that's the key metric, or dollars per square meter if you speak metric. Next slide, please. This is the method that we employed. And I'm not going to get into that because that's for afterwards when we have our social time, if you like. But I'll leave it to say that there's certain levels, there's assumptions that are built into the model around generic types of green infrastructure, biophysical, understanding the biophysical benefits of those types of infrastructure, looking at the literature around the monetization of those benefits, right, and then applying it to the Charrette program. So an example would be, we know that a medium-sized tree has a canopy, a mature medium-sized tree has a canopy area of 150 square feet. And we know that a medium-sized tree will intercept ½ an inch of stormwater that falls upon it. Therefore, if stormwater is valued at 0.003 cents per cubic foot, we can estimate in terms of stormwater what that tree will do for a particular community. There's going to be a test at the end, you know. This is, I think, the genius of it, because working with the local communities, what we found is some of them have no idea what it costs stormwater to manage. Not a clue. And other communities have a very good understanding of what a cubic foot of stormwater. So does Austin, Texas know what a cubic foot of stormwater costs? Because if you don't know what a cubic foot of stormwater costs the city to manage, if you haven't come out with a valuation of that, then we can do it for you because we have high, medium, and low values from the literature that we can apply. But if you don't know what the value of stormwater management for green infrastructure, if you can't put a dollar value on it, then you're missing the boat in terms of being able to value the things that you do, that you're interested on, that you want to work on. Because stormwater management is a really important benefit, right? Because it helps to reduce flooding, it offsets costs associated with water and wastewater treatment facilities. It helps to improve the livability, swimmability, drinkability, fishability of your receiving water bodies. It has tangible values that are important to the people of Austin. But you got to crunch the numbers and do the math to figure out what that is. Next slide, please. So those are the types of benefits we were able from the literature to get a handle on. As I mentioned, on the cost side, we've got the total capital cost, average capital cost per square foot, maintenance costs on an annual basis. Then we have a benefit in terms of biodiversity or creation of habitat, but you have to identify that that is one of the design objectives. Stormwater management, air quality, greenhouse gas sequestration. Watch out for this one because after Paris, that's going to become increasingly important. Reduction in the urban heat island. Does it get hot around here? I heard it can get hot around here. Not in February, though. Reduction in building energy use. We've got job creation capital when you're installing the green infrastructure, and then the annual job creation. Great opportunity for creating employment. We've got property values. We know for a fact that if you increase the amount of green infrastructure in a neighborhood, the property values are going up in that neighborhood. That's undeniable. There's been so much literature done on that, it's unreal. Of course, if property values go up, tax revenue might go up too. Right? If tax revenue is actually linked to property value. Is it in Austin? I don't know. Many places it is, many places it isn't. Urban food production, lots of opportunity there, both in terms of jobs, social justice, fantastic, but it has to be specified by the designers. And then for the green roofs, we have the increase in the lifespan of the roofing membrane. So that's what we've been able to quantify in the literature, given the current level of research. And when I say quantify, I mean in some cases biophysically, but in all cases monetized. These are all dollar values per square foot. And then because there's a lot of complexity, we've tried to do high, medium, and low. So for example, building a square foot of green roof in New York City is going to be much higher than Chicago, Illinois, right? Because costs of construction are way higher in New York than they are in Chicago. So we can do high, medium, and low and vary these costs and benefits depending on the local circumstances, even if we don't know what the value of a cubic foot of stormwater is. Next slide, please. Now, despite all that monetization of value, there's a whole bunch of stuff out there, benefits of green infrastructure, that we can't monetize, that we are not able to right now put a value on. And some of them are pretty darn important. Remember I talked about biophilia earlier in commercial buildings and how people become more productive and they have less sick days, right? And they're healthier and happier, right? We don't have a way with our methodology of really trying to capture the health and well-being aspect for society, right? So you have a design team, they want to put a park somewhere where there's no park. Let's say they want to take a municipal parking lot, take that parking lot away, put a park in. And we know there's going to be kids playing in that park, the kids are going to be healthy, adults will be healthier, but we don't know how to put a value on it. We're not there yet. We can do it for commercial buildings, but we can't do it for all forms of green infrastructure. Reduction of flooding. The reduction of flooding is a tricky one. We know there's a real value there. If we can hold more of that storm back, absorb more of that rainwater so it's not wiping houses out, there's a real benefit there. Have you guys got a value, a flooding green infrastructure value worked out for Austin? Apparently there needs to be some work done on that potentially. Maybe you can help us break some new ground on that to try to figure it out, because very few people have figured out how to capture that value in a monetary way. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but it's just to say that when we provide you with numbers through the Green Infrastructure Charrette program, we are understating the value because we can't monetize a lot of these values. Right off the bat, we've hobbled ourselves because we can't get at all these numbers. Next slide, please. So that is one of the spreadsheets that we use in the Green Infrastructure Cost-Benefit Matrix. You have the types of green infrastructure down here on the vertical axis, and you have the costs here, and then the types of benefits all on a square cost per square foot, benefit per square foot, dollars per square foot. Next slide, please. Now here are the types of green infrastructure, generic types of green infrastructure that we've built into the model. Next slide, please. Extensive green roof, lightweight, 6 inches or less, growing medium. Next slide, please. Intensive green roof, like a roof garden, trees, shrubs, fantastic, more expensive, higher leaf area index, higher capital and costs, or like a park on top of a roof. Next slide, please. A green facade, that's where we use climbers, right? The climbers, they live in the ground, they suck moisture out of the ground, they can survive a lot more heat and drought conditions. Ivy League universities, right? The ivy, that's kind of what's happening here, except we have structures that actually keep the plants off of the facade of the building. Next one. Living wall interior, we're seeing a lot more of these applications now. Living wall systems, some of them are designed to actually clean the air and save energy in terms of air exchange. Other ones are designed for moisturizing the air inside of a building. They all have fantastic biophilic properties. It's a great way to get green space in a very limited area in terms of public areas inside of buildings. Next slide, please. Then there's the living wall, which is also known as a vertical garden or a green wall. There's lots of different ways of going about doing this. There's different irrigation systems. Some of them use growing medium. Some of them use hydroponics. Some of them have trellis supports. Some of them have locking panels that lock in and out. They're primarily for aesthetic purposes, but there are also biodiversity, plant-based applications, and urban agricultural applications. And there's a lot more R&D, I think, that's going to go into this technology over the next little while to bring costs down and improve the benefits. Next slide, please. Bioretention facilities, rain gardens, fairly simple construction. It's designed really to capture water, typically off of buildings, and allow it to seep into the ground if that's possible. Next slide, please. Bioswales are similar, except they're connected to the stormwater sewer. They're usually found adjacent to roadways and sidewalks. Next slide, please. Porous paving systems. We put those in there because a lot of those do facilitate plant growth. Some of them there are systems that don't, but there are quite a few that do, so we included them. They're primarily reduction in urban heat island benefits and stormwater management. Next slide, please. Greenways, various types of turf. Next slide, please. And then trees presented a particular problem for us because, it's hard to generalize when it comes to trees, but we dug deeply into the literature, and we recognize that you can divide trees into three types: small, medium, and large. And this has to do really with the canopy size because that's what we're measuring at maturity. Next slide, please. So we've got medium trees. Next slide. And large trees, those are just examples of different species. Of course, they'll be different in different climates. Trees are obviously really important for the urban environment in terms of the cooling in the summertime. Next slide, please. So how do we take all this and put it together? How do we get people to take a look at an area and do a green infrastructure makeover? Well, we've given you 15 generic types of green infrastructure. We've analyzed costs and benefits, how they pertain to the local community. And we've given you an area that's devoid of green infrastructure or is in need of green infrastructure, or maybe it's going to be under development pretty soon. It has to be selected carefully. And we get small groups of people, 8 to 10 per area. And we usually do fairly large sites, 10 to 20 blocks in size, but we can do smaller scales. We can do larger scales. There's pros and cons. And then we get them together. They do a walk through the area. They get background information about strengths and weaknesses, and there's an opportunity to do things like in Harlem, for example. They were very interested in how do we create jobs through green infrastructure in Harlem? How do we create employment opportunities through food production? That was one of their big things that we worked on in Harlem. And then we have them start to do the design work. Next slide, please. That's what the day looks like. It starts very much broadly conceptual, sort of a SWOT analysis, down to very detailed to scale designs of the types of green infrastructure the design teams feel are appropriate for each area. Next slide, please. These are the major basic steps to the whole process that we run through. We produce a final report with the detailed drawings. In fact, the report right now for Harlem is being reviewed by all of the people that attended the Charrette. And then at the end, we do a post-Charrette gathering, social gathering. We present to the players. We look at options for next steps and what could be done to continue the process. Next slide. At the end of the day, we do need very detailed information. Particularly, we need, through the Green Infrastructure Workbook, we need to know the square foot quantification of each type of green infrastructure that you're going to apply to a particular area. Excuse me. And we need that so that we can then apply that area to the cost-benefit matrix, right? So if we say, for example, that for every $100 you spend on a bioswale, you create 1/10 of a person-year of employment, and a bioswale is $10, then we know if you do 10 square feet of bioswales, you get 1 person-year of employment, right? That's how we connect the design work, right, to the cost-benefit analysis and the job creation. And we can identify next steps. What are the priorities for action? What type of resources are available? If the community had its way, would it choose this thing first over that thing? Let's say we're thinking about a 10-year plan here, right, to do a makeover. You don't go from this to this overnight, right? Next slide, please. So Harlem, New York, the first time we went right to one of the iconic neighborhoods in the United States. I found a local partner, the Baptist Church, worked with the city, got the community together with some expert designers, and Eleanor was there. She donated her time. We had presentations from the city about what they were doing. They're actually building a lot of bioswales in Harlem right now, several thousand bioswales they're implementing to try to deal with flooding and stormwater. And then the team went to work. Next slide, please. So one of the teams had a fairly large area to work with. This is the area between 135th Street and 121st Street. We did a walkabout the area the night before with the team. They had all the background information, Google shots, street views, information from the neighborhood. You know, and you can see, you know, even just looking at from this area from a Google shot, you know, that there's not a lot of tremendous amount of green space in Harlem. It's a very built-up neighborhood, right? There's a lot of buildings in Harlem. Next slide. So where do you put the green space? Well, this team came up with this pretty radical idea. They called it New Harlem Lane. And they looked at this one street. Is it McDonald? Is it McDonald? Malcolm that cuts across, Malcolm X Boulevard that cuts across. And in discussing with locals, they found out there's not a lot of traffic. The street isn't really fully utilized. And they said, well, why don't we, and they also recognized that there's Central Park, and there was another park, I don't remember the name of it, at the top end. And they wanted to create a greenway to connect the two parks to one another and allow movement in Harlem between these two major parks, Central Park and the park to the north. Next slide, please. So they came up with these conceptual ideas. There's a shot of the street view shot. They said, well, why don't we close it to cars, create pedestrian walkways, put a giant bioswale down the middle of it. We'll increase the tree coverage, and we'll create this beautiful passageway, greenway between these two park systems. And that's a pretty radical idea, right? Closing a street to automobiles. Do you want to see the blood pressure of a driver go up? If we try to do that where I come from, there'd be hell to pay, I'll tell you that right now. But in New York, the person from the transportation department said, yeah, give us 10 years, we could probably do that. Because they're already starting to shut streets down, right, in cities like New York for the weekend and things like that, right? And I think as time goes on, I'm going to stick my neck out here, more and more cities are going to start actually retaking the streets for people instead of cars. I think this is a trend we're just seeing the edge of right now. We'll see a lot more of it in the future. Very cool idea, not immediately implementable. Let's see what it looks like with the numbers. Next slide, please. So let's crunch some numbers on this concept. They had some green roofs they threw in there. They used some rain gardens. They had bioswales, lots of bioswales, permeable pavement. They put a lot of trees in. And then we calculated what the square footage. They have very high construction costs in New York. We figured out what the construction costs were going to be. We figured out what the annual maintenance costs are. And the benefits come in two flavors. One-time benefits, like a one-shot benefit, like biodiversity is a one-shot benefit, whereas stormwater, which is retained every year, is an ongoing annual benefit, right? Air quality benefits are annual because they're constantly being generated, but property value increase is a one-time benefit. So, you know, for an initial construction capital cost of about $10 million, sorry for the 8 bouncing down there, you've got a one-time benefit of $14,140,000 and an annual benefit of about $1.2 million. And that's with about 10 types of benefits not even being quantified. We haven't even quantified all the benefits that exist because we can't monetarily. So it's very conservative. Next slide, please. So then we look at it from a 1, 5, 25, 50-year period. We obviously don't take all these benefits up in year 1. It takes time for property value benefits to kick in. It takes time for trees to mature. So, you know, we bring these benefits online as the green infrastructure improves. And we find here in this particular case, 170 jobs created on from this project to the capital works, and about 7 jobs on an annualized basis to maintain the stretch of greenway on this road. Next slide. So here's another example from, this is a green field development in a place called Vaughan. This is a natural pond part of a wetland complex. They did some initial design. They want to put multi-story buildings in here. This is a roadway. These are two roadways. This is a corner lot. There are some flooding control issues here. There was quite a lot of technical stuff. We had technical people. There were a lot of technical considerations. Next slide. Design team came up with this concept. Opened up the whole corner of the area here, created a pedestrian walkway, reconnected, daylighted the stream to come through here, created these pedestrian walkways, reoriented the buildings for greater solar, passive solar, and moved them around. And then the next slide, please. And then they dropped the edges. See, there's some sketches here. They tried to soften the edges of the buildings with green infrastructure down to the pond. So some fantastic design work that came out of this one in a very short period of time that will save the developers money. In fact, probably generate more revenue because the property, the whole concept around this was to use the pond as an oasis, as a major resource to strengthen the development of these high-rise towers on this corner. So some cool work. Next slide. Here's another, just to give you some examples from some of the charrettes we've done. This is a very large area. You can see some white roof here. I don't know how that got built. I'm just kidding. I'm not against white roofs, but they do turn gray very quickly. Parking area. There's a residential zone here. We have a major transportation corridors, some more industrial areas of the city and in Toronto. So the team was looking at this and saying, well, what can we do with this? Next slide, please. And so they've really done a serious deep green makeover. They put green roofs on most of the buildings. Unfortunately, they didn't quite get the white one there. They put solar panels over the parking structures for shading and to generate energy. They intensified the urban forests. They've put deep greening around the transportation corridors. And they've created a much more lush and vibrant section of the city. Next slide, please. So just to wrap things up, you know, we need pictures, right? Because pictures speak 1,000 words. They're fantastic. But in this day and age, we also need numbers. We have to have numbers to make the case. Because without numbers, we can't make the case. Just like the gray infrastructure people do. They have the numbers, they're able to make the case for the investment, the jobs that get created, right? The importance of the economic benefits. So this is not the be-all and end-all. It's not a perfect tool. It doesn't have constraints and limitations. It does. But it does get us going and talking about what does green infrastructure mean for us in our community? How can green infrastructure deliver the goods and services that we like and desire and make Austin a really beautiful and wonderful place to continue to live in? And we know that Austin, like many cities, is under a lot of pressure. You've got development pressure. You've got population increasing. You've got more severe flooding from storms that's happening all over the place. You have more intensive heat, right? Heaven forbid in the future there's problems with food supply. I don't know how many people realize how much food comes from California and the fact that they're predicting severe drought over the next 40 years in California, Southern California, where a lot of our food comes from. Dare I say food security. But the fact is that green infrastructure can provide multiple solutions